What good is a throne when you're the only one in the kingdom? 50 floors above the earth, Elizabeth Harris presided over a silent, sprawling empire of glass and steel. Below her, the metropolis sprawled out in the pouring rain, a breathtaking watercolor of blurred taillights and shimmering electric blue reflections on the slick asphalt. It was a river of life, of a million interconnected stories, and she watched it all from behind a wall of impenetrable glass, a ghost in her own home. The fortress she had built to keep the world out, she now realized with a familiar, chilling certainty, had only trapped her inside. The silence in the penthouse was a physical weight, a tangible presence that suffocated the air, broken only by the sharp, lonely clink of ice against a crystal tumbler. The cold of the glass seeped into her fingers, a welcome numbness. Every priceless object, every sterile, polished surface, seemed to scream the same question her heart couldn't stop asking. Was this really worth it? The burn of the expensive single malt whiskey sliding down her throat was the only answer she had. And tonight it wasn't nearly enough. The final verdict on her life had been delivered this afternoon, not in a quiet moment of reflection, but in the polished mahogany cage of the Innovate Corp boardroom. She could still feel the chill of the room, still see the predatory smiles on the faces of men who called her their leader, but were merely waiting for a moment of weakness. The attack had come from a rival she had professionally neutered years ago, his voice a silken dagger meant to wound her in front of the others. "Your legacy, Elizabeth," he had sneered, letting the words hang in the air like poison, "is built on sacrifices." He thought it was a simple insult, a jab at her well-known ruthlessness. He had no idea he was delivering the eulogy for the woman she used to be, for the life she had given up. They saw the woman who could decimate a competitor's stock price with a single, perfectly timed press release. They couldn't see the ghost that stood beside her at all times, the phantom of a man whose laughter she could still sometimes hear in a quiet room, the man she had left standing on a street corner 14 years ago, choosing the promise of a corner office over the certainty of his love. They couldn't see the gaping void his absence had left behind, a wound so vast that all the money, power, and accolades in the world were nothing but dust trying to fill a canyon. Her success wasn't a monument, it was a tombstone, and his name was carved on it. With that verdict ringing in her ears, the single glass of whiskey in her hand was no longer a comfort. It was an insult to the depth of her pain. She needed more. She needed oblivion. And so she found herself at the Onyx Club, a subterranean world of dark wood, crushed velvet, and hushed conversations where the city's elite came to make deals and nurse their secrets. She didn't belong here, not really. She belonged in a boardroom, a war room, a place of action and strategy. But tonight she needed the opposite. She needed the shadows, the anonymity that came from being surrounded by people who were too absorbed in their own importance to notice the cracks in her facade. She drank not for pleasure, but for the dull, heavy numbness that she prayed would follow. The amber liquid burned a welcome path down her throat, a clean fire that momentarily scorched the pain and silenced the echoes of the boardroom. But the ghost of her past was far more resilient. One glass became two, then three. The composed, untouchable mask of Elizabeth Harris, CEO, began to feel heavy, to slip and slide away with each searing sip. She could feel the pity and curiosity in the fleeting glances of other patrons, and for the first time in over a decade, she was too exhausted to meet their gaze with the icy authority that would force them to look away. The world tilted violently on its axis, the sharp lines of skyscrapers smearing into long, distorted streaks of light as if the very fabric of reality was melting around her. Her driver, a silent, punctual man named Arthur, was supposed to be waiting in his immaculate Blacktown car, the familiar, comfortable cocoon that would whisk her back to her silent, empty cage. Through the dizzying haze of alcohol and grief, her eyes landed on a dark sedan idling by the curb. It was enough. Lurching forward with a sense of desperate urgency, she pulled the heavy back door open without a second thought, a ship seeking any port in a storm. She collapsed into the seat, the soft fabric a welcome relief, and surrendered to the darkness, the world mercifully dissolving as the car began to move. It was getting late, a long night of ferrying the city's ghosts from one place to another. He glanced at the dashboard, at the small crayon drawing of a brilliant yellow sun taped just above the speedometer. Lily, his Lily. Her 8-year-old smile was the only sun that could pierce a night this bleak. He was thinking of her, of the new chapter book they were reading together, of the ache he felt knowing he wouldn't be there to tuck her in, when his back door was suddenly wrenched open. A woman, drenched to the bone and radiating an aura of expensive perfume and even more expensive whiskey, tumbled inside. His first instinct was to tell her she had the wrong car, but the sound of the door slamming shut was followed by a silence so profound, so heavy with the despair he recognized from his own life, that the words died on his lips. He drove for a few blocks in a quiet procession through the glistening empty streets. The steady drumming of the rain on the roof and the swish of the wipers were the only sounds, a hypnotic, lonely rhythm. In his rearview mirror, he could see the silhouette of his passenger. Her head leaned heavily against the cool glass of the window. Her clothes, a tailored suit that probably cost more than his monthly rent, were wrinkled and damp. He saw the stark, impossible contrast between their worlds. Her life of exclusive clubs and penthouses, and his, of late-night shifts and a constant quiet worry about the next bill. He was a man fighting to provide for the one person he had left. She seemed to be a woman who had everything and was fighting against herself. And yet, in the shared silence of his old, clean car, they were just two lonely souls, moving through the storm-swept night. A soft, broken sound escaped her lips, a whisper so faint he almost thought he'd imagined it. "It's all empty." He strained his ears, not wanting to intrude but unable to ignore the raw pain in her voice. "I built it all," she murmured again, her voice thick with an unspeakable sorrow. "And it's empty." The words were not meant for him, but they landed in the center of the car and hung there, raw and devastatingly human. Daniel's gaze flickered to the mirror again. The curiosity was gone, replaced by a sudden gut-wrenching pang of empathy. He was a widower. He knew the sound of a heart breaking. He recognized the specific, quiet agony of a loneliness that no amount of worldly success could ever cure. He offered her the dignity of his silence, but her words settled deep into his own tired soul, a painful echo of a grief he knew all too well. He pulled up to the gleaming, ostentatious entrance of the Celestial Tower, a building that pricked the sky like a needle of pure hubris. Getting her out of the car was a challenge. The powerful CEO was now struggling to make her limbs obey, her usual grace and authority stripped away by alcohol and sorrow. Daniel killed the engine. He could leave her here. Let the doorman, with his crisp uniform and practiced indifference, handle it. It wasn't his job. It wasn't his problem. But then he thought of Lily, of her unconditional trust, of the simple decency he was trying to teach her. He thought of what it felt like to be utterly alone and in desperate need of a helping hand. With a sigh that spoke of a deep, weary kindness that the world had failed to extinguish, he got out of the car and walked around to her door, opening it to the sheeting rain. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice steady and calm. "Let me help you." He could feel the fine, expensive fabric of her coat, the slight, uncontrollable tremble running through her body. He felt the profound vulnerability hidden beneath the powerful persona, a secret self she would never willingly allow the world to see. He was a complete stranger, a nameless driver from the night, and yet in this moment, he was the only person on earth holding her up. He finally managed to get the door open, guiding her inside to a stark white sofa just before her legs gave out. The sheer scale of the apartment hit him first. It was vast, cold, and as impersonal as a modern art gallery. It was a masterpiece of design and a complete failure as a home. Elizabeth's eyes fluttered closed, a single stray tear tracing a shimmering path through her perfect makeup as she collapsed into the cushions. A deep, aching melancholy washed over Daniel. He saw not a titan of industry, but a profoundly lost woman. Quietly, he backed towards the door, feeling like an intruder in her gilded cage. He pulled the heavy door closed, the lock clicking shut with an air of brutal finality, sealing her inside her silent kingdom. He turned and walked away into the rain, his mind troubled by the woman he was leaving behind and completely unaware that her wallet and the fragile key to both their futures had slipped from her purse and now lay on the floor of his car. The morning broke gray and damp, the storm having passed, leaving the city washed clean and smelling of wet concrete. Daniel's world, a universe away from the silent penthouse on the 51st floor, came to life not with a jarring alarm, but with the gentle, gurgling sigh of his old coffee maker. His small apartment was a library of a life well lived, the walls covered in the comforting clutter of his daughter's artistic creations. A purple cat with too many legs was taped to the fridge, next to a spelling test proudly displaying a gold star. He moved through the pre-dawn light with the quiet, practiced ballet of a single parent, packing a lunchbox with a sandwich cut into a star shape, just the way Lily liked it. His life wasn't measured in quarterly earnings or stock prices, but in these quiet rituals of devotion. This small, cluttered kingdom, filled with worn-out storybooks and the faint, sweet scent of lavender soap, was his entire world, and he was its sole, dedicated protector. As his hand swept across the back floor mats, his fingers brushed against something smooth and foreign. He pulled it out. It was a woman's wallet, sleek and black, made of a leather so fine it felt like silk. It was impossibly elegant, and completely out of place in his 10-year-old sedan. His heart gave a little thud of recognition. It belonged to the woman from last night, the sad queen from the glass tower. He knew instantly that returning it would be complicated, an unwelcome intrusion into a world where he was meant to be invisible. He hesitated, the wallet feeling heavy in his calloused hand, before unzipping it with a reluctant sigh, hoping to find an address or an ID. She was a legend, a titan of the tech world whose face, cool and composed, was often on the cover of business magazines. He looked at her driver's license photo. Her expression was severe, her eyes looking straight ahead with an unshakable confidence that bordered on defiance. It was the face of a warrior, so jarringly different from the broken, vulnerable woman he had guided home just hours earlier. He saw the name of her company, Innovate Corp., embossed in gold on a private access card. He saw a stack of $100 bills that could erase his debts in a single afternoon. But what he didn't see was life. There were no worn-edged pictures of family, no smiling children or beloved partners tucked into the plastic sleeves. It was as cold, transactional, and impersonal as the building she lived in. It required nothing more of him and would prevent the inevitable awkwardness of a face-to-face meeting. He had done his part. But then, as he stood there in the quiet morning, he heard her voice again, a ghostly echo in the darkness of his car. The raw, broken whisper, "It's all empty." He recalled the profound, cavernous loneliness he had witnessed, the utter vulnerability of a woman completely stripped of her power and her armor. He imagined her waking up this morning not only with the crushing weight of shame, but with the added frantic panic of this loss. An impulse of simple human decency, a quality the world had tried so hard to beat out of him, made his decision. He had to return it himself. It wasn't about the wallet anymore. Each ray of light was a spike driving directly into her skull. A low groan escaped her lips as she pushed herself into a sitting position, the cool silk sheets feeling clammy against her feverish skin. The events of the previous night came back to her not as a clear memory, but as a series of humiliating, disjointed snapshots of failure. The bitter taste of too much whiskey, the hostile, predatory faces of the board members, the slick, wet pavement of the street rushing up to meet her, the dizzying, helpless feeling of falling. Her perfect, calculated, absolute control had been utterly obliterated, and a wave of hot, sickening shame washed over her, making her stomach clench. The memory made her skin crawl with a deep, visceral mortification. She, Elizabeth Harris, had been a drunken, helpless mess, utterly dependent on a complete stranger. She had built her entire life, her entire empire, on the principle of never needing anyone. That single, glaring lapse in control felt like a catastrophic failure, a fundamental betrayal of self. It was a weakness, a crack in the armor she had spent a lifetime forging around her heart, and she despised herself for it with an intensity that left her breathless. But her wallet was gone. A frantic, desperate search began, her hands patting down the sofa cushions, her eyes scanning the vast, empty room as if it might materialize out of thin air. It wasn't there. The loss wasn't about the money. The cash was meaningless. It was about the violation. A stranger had been in her space, had seen her at her absolute lowest, and now he had a piece of her life. Her name, her address, her identity. The thought was unbearable. Another layer of humiliation on an already agonizing morning. But it buzzed again, longer this time, a sound of calm, infuriating persistence that frayed her last nerve. With a surge of irritation that served as a welcome shield for her anxiety, she stalked to the wall-mounted security monitor. Her finger jabbed the screen to life, and then she saw him, the driver from last night. He'd found the wallet, and now he was here to collect his reward, probably hoping for a generous tip for his heroic troubles. This, at least, was a language she understood. A simple, clean transaction. Power dynamics she could control. She could handle this. She could pay him off, buy his silence, and erase this entire humiliating episode from existence. She strode to a console table in the hall, pulling a thick stack of $100 bills from a hidden drawer, a familiar and comforting tool of control. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she meticulously composed her face into a mask of icy indifference and swung the heavy door open, ready for battle, or instead his expression was one of quiet, genuine concern, his gentle gaze completely and utterly disarming. He held her wallet out in a hand that was weathered and calloused from a life of hard work, a stark, grounding contrast to the sleek designer object it held. Before she could thrust the wad of cash at him, before she could utter a single dismissive word to put him back in his place as a faceless nobody, he began to speak. His voice was calm, steady, and it wasn't the voice of a man who wanted anything from her. It was the voice of a man who had come to give something back. He gently pushed the wallet into her unresisting hand, his calloused fingers brushing against hers for a fleeting electric second. The money she was holding suddenly felt coarse and vulgar, a crude tool for a problem it could not possibly solve. His words were not an opening for negotiation. They were a simple, unvarnished statement of fact from one human being to another. He had been worried. For her, the very concept was so foreign in her world of calculated relationships and strategic alliances that her mind struggled to process it, leaving her utterly, speechlessly adrift.
And last night, seeing you, well, I know what it's like to feel alone.
He wasn't judging her drunkenness or her wealth.
He wasn't pitying her. He was connecting with her on a level that no one had been allowed to reach for years. He spoke of loneliness not as a weakness to be hidden or a problem to be solved, but as a familiar, desolate country where they had both at times resided. His empathy was a quiet, unassuming gift, offered freely, with no expectation of anything in return.
That was it. That was the blow that her formidable, lifelong defenses could not withstand. The cash, her trusted shield and weapon, fell from her numb fingers, scattering across the pristine marble floor like dead leaves in a mausoleum. Her carefully constructed mask of icy control didn't just crack. It disintegrated into dust, revealing the raw, terrified woman beneath. For years, every interaction had been a strategic maneuver. Every kindness a calculated investment designed for a future return. But this man's decency was a currency she had never encountered. It asked for nothing. It simply was. In the face of such genuine, unprompted humanity, Elizabeth Harris, the powerful CEO of Innovate Corp., was completely and utterly disarmed, left exposed and vulnerable in the doorway of her own empty kingdom. As he had passed the wallet to her, it had fallen slightly open. Her gaze, already blurred by the first sting of tears, fell upon a small, plastic-covered photograph tucked inside a worn sleeve. It was a school picture, slightly faded and creased at the corners, of a little girl with a gap-toothed smile and eyes that shone with a pure, unadulterated joy that Elizabeth couldn't remember ever feeling herself. This was Lily, the son, drawn in crayon and taped to his dashboard, the reason he worked through the lonely, rain-slicked nights. It was a portrait of a life filled with a purpose so fundamental, so powerful, that it made Elizabeth's entire billion-dollar empire feel like a pile of worthless, glittering sand. She had a father whose entire world revolved around her, a love that was unconditional, absolute, and unshakable. It was a treasure Elizabeth had unknowingly, foolishly, bartered away years ago for market shares and corner offices, convincing herself they were the same thing as happiness. The thing she owned could be bought, sold, or broken. But the love reflected in that little girl's eyes was priceless and eternal. It was a wealth she had forgotten how to even seek, let alone acquire, and the sudden, brutal recognition of that loss was an agony beyond all measure. The sobs were for the love she had sacrificed, for the child she never had, for the woman she might have been if she hadn't built her life into such a magnificent, solitary cage. She stood in the doorway of her palace, weeping uncontrollably in front of a complete stranger, stripped of her power, her prestige, and everything but her own cavernous, echoing sorrow. She saw the quiet strength etched into the lines of his weathered face, the deep well of kindness in his tired eyes. "You have a purpose," she whispered, her voice cracking with the sheer weight of her confession. A real one. Her hand trembled as she gestured vaguely behind her, towards the cold, silent, perfect expanse of her apartment. "I've spent my entire life building all of this," she said, the words tumbling out, broken and raw with self-loathing. Building things that can't love me back. It was the truest sentence she had spoken in years, a final, devastating admission of a bankruptcy no financial report could ever possibly show. She needed his quiet decency in her life, a moral compass in her gilded wasteland, an anchor in her storm. Her gaze locked onto his, her usual commanding tone now replaced by a raw, pleading urgency. "I want to offer you a job," she said, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess their madness. "Don't say no, please, just listen. I need you to work for me, as my personal driver. But more than that," she said, her voice dropping thick with tears. "You will have regular hours. No more nights, no more weekends. You will be home every single evening to put your daughter to bed." She was offering him the one thing she knew he valued above all else, the one thing she could never get back for herself: time. He had come here driven by a simple act of conscience, an attempt to do one small good thing in a complicated world. He had expected to be dismissed, perhaps with a curt thank you or a grudging oversized tip. He was not prepared to be offered a lifeline. He was not prepared to have his entire life irrevocably changed by this powerful, beautiful, utterly broken woman who was weeping in her doorway, offering him the world. He looked at her tear-streaked face, a portrait of desperate sincerity, and his own world tilted dangerously on its axis, caught between the hard-scrabble life he knew and the impossible one she was offering. An end to the quiet shame of telling his daughter, maybe next week, when she looked longingly at a new book in a store window. But his pride, a resilient and deeply ingrained thing, recoiled at the thought. He was not a charity case, not a project for a wealthy woman to ease her conscience. He was a man who had always stood on his own 2 feet, even when the ground beneath them was crumbling. He looked at this powerful woman, her face still streaked with tears. A portrait of raw desperation and a deep-seated suspicion rose within him. Was this just the fleeting, dramatic whim of the rich? An offer she would regret and rescind once her momentary weakness passed? He could not bear the thought of his life, and more importantly Lily's, being a game to someone else. He saw a profound and desperate plea. This wasn't charity, it was a trade. She wasn't offering him a handout, she was trying to hire an anchor. In her world of shifting alliances and transactional relationships, a world he couldn't even begin to imagine, she was looking for something real, something solid to hold on to. He realized, with a sudden, startling clarity, that she needed him for reasons that had nothing to do with his ability to navigate city traffic. She had looked into his life and seen a purpose she lacked, and in her desperation, she was willing to pay any price to keep that simple, honest light near her. She was trying to buy back a piece of her own lost humanity, and he, impossibly, was the one who held the contract. He pictured her small face at the apartment window in the evenings, watching for his headlights, her expression falling slightly when she realized it would be hours yet. He imagined being there every single afternoon to help her with her multiplication tables. He thought of coaching her soccer team, of attending every parent-teacher conference, of providing her with a life of stability, a life free from the constant, unspoken fear of financial instability that he knew she sometimes felt, no matter how hard he tried to hide it. The opportunity to be a more present, more stable father was a gift of unimaginable worth. For Lily, he could swallow his pride. For Lily, he could learn to navigate the treacherous, unknown waters of this strange new world. He straightened his shoulders, his decision settling in his soul not as a surrender but as a choice. He met her gaze not as a potential employee, but as a man making a solemn agreement. "I accept," he said, his voice quiet but firm, resonating with a dignity that could not be bought or sold. "But I have one condition. This must be a job, Ms. Harris. I'm not a project, and I'm not your friend. I will be the best driver you have ever had, and I will earn every dollar you pay me. That is the only way this can work for me." He needed to draw that line in the sand for both their sakes. It was a boundary that would protect his self-respect in the face of her immense wealth and influence. He saw a flicker of something in her tear-filled eyes. Not offense, but a deep, surprising respect. She gave a single shaky nod. "Okay, Daniel," she whispered. "A job." When Daniel arrived at her building, a gleaming black luxury sedan that hummed with a quiet, intimidating power, was waiting for him in the spot where he usually parked his own worn car. The doorman handed him the keys with a look that was a carefully neutral cocktail of curiosity and disdain. The interior smelled of new leather and a faint anonymous floral scent, a world away from the familiar scent of crayons and coffee in his own car. Then Elizabeth emerged from the building and the transformation was jarring. The broken, weeping woman from her doorway had vanished. In her place stood the CEO, her expression an unreadable mask of cool professionalism, her posture rigid in a perfectly tailored suit that was its own form of armor. She had already begun to regret her impulsive moment of vulnerability, and the wall between them was back up, higher and colder than before. The drive to her office was steeped in a thick, charged silence, entirely different from the anonymous quiet of their first journey. This silence was heavy with the memory of her confession, with the ghost of her tears and the weight of the life-altering bargain they had struck. To break it, she picked up her phone and made a series of sharp, impersonal business calls, her voice a weapon of efficiency. Daniel focused on the road, his hands steady on the leather-wrapped steering wheel, acutely aware of her clipped tones in the back seat. He could feel her trying to force him into a neat box labeled employee, trying to normalize the surreal circumstances of his hiring. But they both knew it was far more complicated than that. The memory of her sorrow was a third passenger in the car, one they were both pretending not to see. From his new vantage point, Daniel became an observer of her gilded cage. He pulled up to the Innovate Tower, a breathtaking monument of mirrored glass and sharp angles that seemed to pierce the very clouds. He saw the way the world parted for her, the sea of employees falling silent as she swept through the cavernous lobby. He witnessed the strained smiles and deferential nods from executives in expensive suits who both feared and revered her. He began to truly understand the crushing weight of the empire she carried on her shoulders, the profound, suffocating isolation that came with being at the apex of such immense power. He saw not just the fortress, but the lonely prisoner it was built to contain, and his empathy for her against all odds deepened. Daniel would later learn this was Marcus Thorne, a board member and her chief rival. "Elizabeth, darling," Marcus said, his smile not reaching his eyes. He kissed her cheek, then his gaze flicked over to Daniel, lingered for a moment and dismissed him entirely. He turned back to Elizabeth, his voice a low proprietary murmur. "A new driver? You must tell me where you find these people." It wasn't a question, it was a judgment. In that single condescending moment, Daniel felt the full force of his otherness. He was an anomaly, an out-of-place piece in the perfect, polished puzzle of Elizabeth's life, a curiosity to be scrutinized. Later he sat on the edge of Lily's bed, a well-worn book of fairy tales open in his hands. "You're home early, Daddy," she said, her voice soft with sleepiness. "I'm home right on time," he replied, his heart swelling with a feeling so pure and powerful it almost brought tears to his eyes. He read to her until her eyes grew heavy, and then he tucked the blanket snugly under her chin, kissing her soft forehead. The quiet, overwhelming joy of this simple, domestic act was his reward. It was the purpose Elizabeth had seen in him, the treasure she had offered him the world to protect. In that moment, he knew, without a single doubt, that he had made the right choice. Miles away, Elizabeth stood alone in her vast, silent penthouse, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy of distant, unreachable stars. She had her new driver, a man of quiet integrity on her payroll, a constant, living reminder of her own brokenness. But the silence in her home was now deeper, the emptiness more pronounced than ever before, a stark and lonely echo in the very heart of her kingdom. If this story touched you, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you're listening to this story from. Your support is what motivates us to keep bringing you romances that warm the heart. She was meticulously reinforcing the boundary he had initially set, using his own words as a shield against the memory of her own vulnerability. She treated him with a cold, distant courtesy, as if trying to convince both of them that he was just another interchangeable part of her well-oiled machine. But the silence in the car began to change. The initial, suffocating awkwardness slowly gave way to a more comfortable, companionable quiet. For Elizabeth, the car became a sanctuary, a silent cocoon where she could momentarily escape the crushing weight of her crown. The rhythmic motion of the drive, the quiet, steady presence of the man in the front seat, was a balm to her perpetually frayed nerves. He kept the small framed photo of Lily on the dashboard, her gap-toothed smile a constant sunny beacon in the opulent leather and chrome interior. He learned that Elizabeth often skipped lunch, So he started keeping a small cooler in the front seat with a bottle of water and a protein bar, which he would leave for her without a word. He noticed her rubbing her temples after long meetings, so he found a soft, instrumental station on the radio that he would play at a low volume on the ride home. He never intruded, never initiated conversation beyond a polite "good morning," but his steady, observant kindness was a silent counterpoint to the relentless, high-stakes pressure that defined Elizabeth's life. His world, a world of care and simple decency, was slowly, patiently seeping into the cracks of hers. She noted the patient calm in his hands as he navigated the city's snarled traffic, a stark contrast to the frantic, aggressive energy of everyone else in her orbit. One afternoon, she overheard him on the phone with Lily, his voice softening into a river of pure, undiluted love, as he patiently talked her through a difficult homework problem. Each small observation was a chisel against the stone of her resolve. She resented this intrusion into her carefully ordered world, yet a part of her she had long thought dead was secretly, desperately starved for it. She was observing a language of care she had completely forgotten how to speak. As Daniel waited for her by the car, a group of her colleagues shimmering in silk and jewels walked past. "Is that your new driver, Elizabeth?" One of her board members, a woman named Cynthia, asked, her voice dripping with a thinly veiled condescending amusement. "Quite a departure from your usual service." Another man, a rival CEO, chuckled. "I suppose even titans need a pet project now and then, something to keep them grounded." They saw Daniel not as a person, but as a curiosity, an inexplicable and intriguing lapse in Elizabeth Harris's famously impeccable and ruthless judgment. "Daniel's professionalism is unimpeachable, Cynthia," she said, her gaze locking onto the woman and refusing to let go. "Which is more than I can say for your pathetic attempt at conversation. If you'll excuse me, I have to get back to running the company that pays for your champagne." The comment struck its target with the force of a physical blow, and the group shuffled away in a chastened, awkward silence. But their poisoned words lingered, echoing her own deepest fears, that she was becoming weak, sentimental, and fatally compromised. The Elizabeth he knew was indifferent to the lives of her employees. They were chess pieces. This new defensive posture was a tell, a crack in her armor he hadn't seen before. He looked over at the driver, a no-name man with a kind, steady face and a slow, predatory smile spread across his lips. He finally saw it. Daniel wasn't a driver. He was a weakness. He was a lever. And Marcus knew exactly how to use a lever to bring a building crashing down. The pressure on Elizabeth mounted in the following days, culminating in a brutal board meeting where Marcus subtly and expertly undermined her at every turn. She got into the car that evening feeling as though she had been flayed alive. The carefully constructed armor was gone, and a splitting migraine was taking its place, pounding at her temples with a merciless, blinding rhythm. The lights of the city were fractured daggers of pain. She leaned her head back against the cool leather, her eyes squeezed shut for a moment, forgetting she wasn't alone. She was no longer the CEO. She was just a woman in a profound amount of pain, and the mask had finally, completely slipped. He simply pulled the car over to a quiet, tree-lined side street, the powerful engine humming softly. He reached into the small cooler, retrieved a chilled bottle of water, and passed it back to her, his movements calm and efficient. He then dimmed the interior lights and turned off the soft music entirely, plunging the car into a soothing, silent darkness. It was a simple, intuitive gesture of care, an act of quiet competence that expected nothing in return. It wasn't pity, it was support. "Just breathe," he said softly from the front seat, his voice a calm anchor in her swirling sea of pain. "I'll get you home." The simple kindness, so freely and quietly given, landed with the force of a tidal wave in the arid desert of her life. No one took care of her. She was the one who took care of everything, who managed every crisis, who solved every problem. To be cared for, in such a simple, undemanding way, was an experience so foreign it left her breathless. A strange, unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest, a feeling so potent and terrifying that it felt like a new kind of pain. It was the terrifying feeling of a wall she had relied on for years beginning to crumble. "I'll see you in the morning, Daniel," she said, her voice back to its usual cool, distant tone as she got out of the car. But the moment of shared vulnerability hung in the air between them, shimmering and undeniable. It was a terrifying glimpse of the connection she was so desperately trying to deny, a connection that felt more dangerous than any boardroom battle. And across the street, parked in the shadows, Marcus watched her walk away from the car. His eyes narrowed in triumphant speculation. He had seen the quiet intimacy of the parked car, the wordless exchange. He now knew, with absolute certainty, exactly where to apply the pressure. "Daniel Taylor," he said, his voice a low purr that didn't match the restaurant's cheerful din. The private investigator opposite him, a man with tired eyes and a rumpled suit, picked up the envelope and glanced inside at the single photograph of Daniel. "What am I looking for, Mr. Thorne?" the PI asked, his voice flat. "Debts, vices, a criminal record?" Marcus leaned back, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I want to know everything. Every late rent payment, every youthful mistake, every unpaid parking ticket. Find me a crack, a flaw, a single thread I can pull on until his entire life unravels. I want you to find me a ghost in this man's past." The investigator grunted. "And if there are no ghosts?" Marcus's smile was a cold, thin line. "Then you'll give him one." For Marcus, this wasn't just corporate strategy. It was a personal vendetta wrapped in the justification of ambition. Unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon, the fragile ecosystem inside the black sedan continued to evolve. The once awkward silence had transformed into a comfortable, companionable quiet. It had become a shared space of refuge. For Daniel, it was the steady, reliable core of a new life that was slowly lifting his family out of precarity. For Elizabeth, the car had become a sanctuary, the only place in her world where she wasn't under attack, where no one wanted anything from her. One rainy afternoon, staring at the rain-streaked window, she found herself thinking of the small photograph on the dashboard, of the little girl with the impossibly bright smile. Breaking a week-long silence on personal matters, she spoke into the quiet. "How old is Lily now?" The question, so simple and human, felt momentous, a profound departure from their established protocol. Daniel was visibly surprised by the question, but a warm, genuine smile immediately lit up his face, visible in the rearview mirror. "She'll be 9 in the fall," he answered, his voice filled with a father's unmistakable pride. Elizabeth found herself asking another question. "What is she like?" Daniel chuckled softly. "She's everything. She's fiercely loyal, she's terrible at telling lies, and she thinks she can talk to squirrels. She wants to be an astronaut, but also a chef who makes cupcakes in space." He shared a short, charming story about Lily trying to build a rocket ship out of cardboard boxes in their living room. For 90 seconds, the cavernous divide between the CEO and the driver disappeared, replaced by a simple, shared moment of human connection. The conversation was a single spark of warmth in Elizabeth's cold world, and later that night, alone in her penthouse, she felt both drawn to its memory and terrified of what it might burn. He had to pick up Lily from her after-school program in less than an hour, right when he was scheduled to take Elizabeth to a crucial, late-afternoon meeting across town. His voice was tight with professional dread as he called her, fully expecting the cold fury that followed any disruption to her schedule. "Ms. Harris," he began formally, his apology already prepared. "I have a personal family emergency. I am so sorry, but I may be unable to take you to your 5 o'clock meeting." He was offering his resignation before she could demand it, his integrity dictating that he fall on his own sword. But then she pictured his face as he spoke about Lily, the pure, uncomplicated love in his eyes. She remembered the quiet kindness he had shown her when her own head was pounding with pain. A strange, unfamiliar impulse overrode her ruthless programming. "Where is her school?" Elizabeth asked, the words feeling alien on her tongue. Daniel, stunned, stammered the address. "Pick her up," Elizabeth said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We can't be late for the meeting." She was choosing a person over the protocol, and the decision felt both terrifyingly reckless and strangely liberating. "Her name is Sparklehoof," Lily announced with solemn importance. Elizabeth, who had not interacted with a child in years, was hopelessly awkward, but as she took the drawing, she was utterly captivated. In Lily's innocent, happy face, in the sheer, unadulterated joy she took in her imaginary unicorn, Elizabeth saw a reflection of the purpose, the realness she so desperately craved. The moment was a beautiful, excruciatingly painful glimpse into the world of love she had locked herself out of so long ago. A little girl's crayon drawing held in the same hand that signed billion-dollar deals. The context was entirely innocent, a fleeting moment of kindness in a complicated day. But the investigator knew context didn't matter. He was being paid to find a crack in the armor, and he had just found it. The car, Once a sanctuary, now felt as vast and empty as her penthouse. The lingering scent of Lily's bubble gum and the echo of her bright laughter served only to amplify the profound, suffocating silence she was returning to. She had allowed a sliver of warmth into her life, and now its absence was a physical ache she could feel in her bones. She was becoming attached to Daniel and to the world he represented. A cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach. In her world, attachment was a dangerous, deadly liability. He saw Elizabeth's face, the softness in her eyes as she looked at the child. Disappointment curdled into a cruel, inventive malice. "Fine," Marcus muttered to the empty room, a triumphant smile twisting his lips. "If he's a nobody, we'll make him a somebody." He picked up his phone and dialed the number of a journalist known for valuing sensationalism over facts. The first, carefully crafted lie was about to be leaked into the world. The trap was sprung. The attack came not as a whisper, but as a thunderclap that shook the very foundations of Elizabeth's world. It detonated across the internet on a respected financial news website, an explosive article filled with carefully crafted lies and insidious half-truths. Elizabeth was in her office preparing for the meeting Daniel was driving her to, when her phone began to vibrate with a frantic, unending series of alerts. She opened the link and saw her own face staring back at her, next to a headline designed to destroy her. "Compromised CEO?" Questions swirl around Elizabeth Harris's unusual relationship with new hire amidst espionage fears. She read the poisonous words, her blood turning to ice. The article, citing concerned sources deep within Innovate Corp., painted a lurid fictional picture. It portrayed Daniel Taylor not as a widower and father, but as a cunning operative with a fabricated, suspiciously sparse past. It hinted he was hired by a direct competitor to exploit the CEO's well-known personal isolation. And there, presented as damning evidence, were the photos. Elizabeth smiling softly at Lily's drawing, the image twisted into proof of her inappropriate and unprofessional judgment. It was a masterpiece of malicious fiction, and its impact was immediate and devastating. The fallout was a catastrophic firestorm. The company's stock, her life's work, nosedived in pre-market trading, wiping out billions in value in a matter of minutes. Panic erupted among investors. The board, her board, the men and women she had made wealthy, turned on her with the ferocity of a predator sensing weakness. The narrative Marcus had so carefully seeded took root and flourished in the fertile ground of fear and greed. Elizabeth Harris, the visionary, the titan, was now recast in the public eye as a naive, emotionally compromised woman who had jeopardized her entire empire for a handsome, mysterious driver. Her fortress was under siege, not from the outside, but from the very people who were meant to be standing beside her on the battlements. An emergency board meeting was convened, the summons delivered with the cold finality of a death sentence. The boardroom felt like an arena, and she was the gladiator being led to her execution. The air was thick with the grim tension of a public shaming. Elizabeth walked into the polished mahogany cage, her posture erect, her face a mask of stone, but inside, her world was fracturing into a million pieces. Marcus, the architect of her demise, played his part to perfection. He stood at the head of the table, the picture of grave, reluctant concern, his words dripping with feigned sorrow as he laid out the facts. He twisted every detail, the unusual hiring after a night of personal distress, the private, undocumented drives, the shocking presence of Daniel's child in a corporate vehicle, into a sinister tapestry of betrayal and catastrophic misjudgment. "For the good of the company," he concluded, his voice heavy with false sincerity, "we must act swiftly and decisively to cauterize this wound." It was a clean cut, a way to appease the market and sacrifice a pawn to save the queen. A month ago, she would have made that sacrifice without a second thought. It was the cold, ruthless calculus that had made her a CEO. She looked at their predatory faces, at Marcus's triumphant, barely concealed smirk, and the image blurred. For a split second, she was 14 years younger, standing on a street corner, choosing ambition over love. She was being asked to make the same trade again, to sacrifice a good man's soul to protect her own empire, to cast him to the wolves, to ruin an innocent man and his child to save her own skin, would be the ultimate act of cowardice. It would be a betrayal not just of him, but of the flicker of hope, the flicker of her own forgotten humanity that he had reignited within her. In that moment of terrible, searing clarity, She realized she would rather lose her kingdom than lose that part of her soul again. The choice was made. She would not run. She would burn it all down first. Just as she opened her mouth to deliver her verdict, the great heavy doors of the boardroom swung open with a resounding thud. Daniel Taylor stood in the threshold. He wasn't wearing his driver's jacket, but a simple, clean shirt and worn jeans. He was an ordinary man standing at the precipice of a world of extraordinary power. And yet, in his stillness, he seemed to command the room. A wave of shock and outrage rippled through the board members. He hadn't been summoned. He had no place here. But he had heard the news and he had come. He had come to fight for her at the very moment she had decided to fight for him. He began to speak, and his voice, though quiet, cut through the tension with the clarity of a bell. He didn't speak of stock prices or allegations. He didn't defend himself against the lies. He chose instead to speak about the truth of her character. I've seen her carry the weight of this entire company on her shoulders and never once complain. He then looked directly at the board. You see this situation as a liability. You see a scandal. I see a woman who was in pain one evening, and another human being who tried to help. He paused, letting the words sink in. Her greatest strength isn't her mind for business. It's the heart she tries so desperately to hide from all of you. The only thing she is guilty of is a moment of kindness. And if that's a fireable offense in this company, then you have bigger problems than your stock price. She turned from Daniel to face the stunned board. Her vulnerability no longer a weakness but a weapon, a truth she would finally wield. For years, I have lived for this company, she began, her voice raw with an emotion she had suppressed for a lifetime. I sacrificed everything, love, family, my own happiness, and it left me hollow, alone in a beautiful prison of my own making. This man did not compromise me. He reminded me what I had lost. He reminded me what it means to be human. Her gaze then shifted, landing on Marcus with the force of a physical blow. I will not destroy an innocent man, a good man, to protect a reputation or a stock price. I stake my entire career, I stake this company, I stake everything I have built, on my trust in him. She took a deep breath, her voice clear and unwavering as she delivered her final defiant stand. Now, you will vote, not on my future, but on ours, on what kind of company we truly want to be, one that is ruled by fear and greed, or one that is led with integrity and heart. The choice is yours. The board members, men and women who dealt in the cold, hard certainty of numbers and projections, were confronted with something far more powerful, a genuine human soul laid bare, offering a choice not between profit and loss, but between fear and faith. They looked from Elizabeth's defiant, tear-streaked face to Daniel's quiet, unwavering strength, and then to Marcus's sputtering, guilty rage. It was Arthur Vance, the oldest board member, a man who had backed her when she was just a brilliant, hungry kid with a dream, who broke the silence. He rose slowly to his feet, his old eyes clear and steady. For 30 years, he said, his voice a gravelly rumble that commanded the room, we have talked about innovation. We have celebrated disruption. It seems to me that the most innovative and disruptive thing we can do right now is to choose decency. He looked directly at Elizabeth, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. And then he began to clap. In the chaotic aftermath, a swift and brutal internal investigation was launched. Marcus's treachery, his fabricated story, and his payments to the unscrupulous journalist were all brought to light with astonishing speed. He was unceremoniously ousted, a disgraced footnote in the company's history, his empire of whispers and shadows crumbling into dust. Elizabeth's position as CEO was not just secured, it was fortified with a new kind of loyalty, one built on a profound respect for her character, not just her results. Subsidized childcare, flexible working hours, and expanded family leave became the new standard. The corporate culture began to transform from a relentless, soul-crushing machine into a compassionate, thriving community. She was no longer just building a company. She was building a legacy of humanity, proving that a business could have a heart and still be wildly successful. With the crisis averted and the professional lines between them irrevocably blurred, a new tentative story began for Elizabeth and Daniel. It started simply, with cups of coffee shared in the quiet mornings in her office before the day began, the conversation easy and real. One evening he invited her for dinner, not to an expensive restaurant but to his small, cluttered apartment. She stood awkwardly in his living room, surrounded by the happy chaos of a real home, and felt more welcome than she had in any palace. She helped Lily with her homework, And later, the three of them made spaghetti, laughing as they splattered sauce on the counter. In the quiet, normal moments of that evening, the lonely CEO and the weary single father found their way back to simply being a woman and a man, slowly, carefully, and joyfully falling in love. The cold, sterile penthouse underwent a transformation as profound as its owners. The stark white walls were repainted in warm, inviting colors. A ridiculously expensive, meaningless sculpture was moved to a storage unit, its place taken by a comfortable reading chair, perfect for bedtime stories. And in the most prominent spot over the fireplace, where a cold, abstract painting had once hung, there was now a simple frame holding a crayon drawing of a rainbow-colored unicorn named Sparklehoof. The oppressive silence was replaced by the sounds of life, the bubbling laughter of a child doing homework at the kitchen island, the gentle melody of a song playing on the radio, and the easy, comfortable murmur of a family discussing their day. It was no longer a gallery, it was finally, truly, a home. She became a fixture in Lily's life, a steady, loving presence. She attended parent-teacher conferences, cheered the loudest at soccer games, and became an expert at patching up scraped knees. She learned that a child's trusting hand in hers was a greater reward than any stock option or quarterly profit. In becoming a mother to Lily, a role she accepted with humble gratitude, she was finally able to heal the deepest, most wounded part of her own heart, the part that had believed for so long that it was incapable of ever being truly loved. It was a simple, heartfelt picture of a man, a woman, and a little girl holding hands under a brightly shining sun. At the bottom, in careful, childish letters, was the word, family. The drawing was a perfect portrait of their new reality, a life built not on wealth or power, but on a foundation of unwavering love and mutual respect. Their journey had been improbable, born from a rainy night and a moment of despair, but the destination was more beautiful than either had ever dared to imagine. Elizabeth had channeled her transformation into a new purpose. As the head of Innovate Corp's new philanthropic wing, the Lilly Foundation, she dedicated millions to supporting single parents. The foundation provided grants, career counseling, and emergency aid to those struggling to balance the demands of work and family, ensuring that others walking the difficult path Daniel had once walked would not have to do so alone. She had taken the greatest lesson of her life, that human connection is the only true wealth, and turned it into a legacy that would change thousands of lives for the better, a testament to the idea that the most powerful innovations are the ones that come from the heart. Daniel pushes a laughing Lily on a swing, her feet soaring towards the sky as if she could touch the clouds. Elizabeth watches them, her face alight with a serene and contented joy that no amount of money could ever buy. She is no longer a lonely queen in an ivory tower. She is a wife, a mother, a woman who is deeply and completely loved. As the sun begins to set, Daniel stops the swing and the three of them walk off together. Hand in hand, a perfect unbroken circle of love, finally and forever, whole.